While the races of man and mer forged their legacies in steel and stone, the vast green land of Valenwood in southwest Tamriel grows unkempt, the systematic order of expanding empires ceasing at the border of this curious province. Here in Valenwood, the forest god determines the shape of the landscape, and the place is a sprawl of impossibly dense jungles, labyrinths of lofty skyscraping grottoes, and the tranquil sway of vibrantly coloured flowers in meadows undisturbed by ambitious mortals. All of this isolated greenery is protected by mangrove swamps sweeping across the shoreline. As the description seems to suggest, the other provinces of Tamriel and their respective leaders have had serious trouble dealing with Valenwood throughout history. Outside of the half-hidden cities, which move sporadically by the will of the Falanesti and other grottoes, nothing is distinguishable or easy to navigate for any race but the bosmer. In this video, we'll be giving you a little insight into the history of this relatively untouched province, and we'll be delving into its unique customs and relations with the other cultures of Tamriel. Let's start things off by saying almost nothing is known of Valenwood from the Dawn and Malefic eras. I mean, it's difficult enough to figure out what on earth is happening there in the present, let alone the ancient past. The one noteworthy thing that did happen, however, is that it was the goings-on in Valenwood which ended the Malefic era and sparked the beginning of the First. Usually the honour of starting a new era was saved for something like the assassination of an emperor, or the unification of a continent, but due to the importance of Valenwood as a means for the Aelid kingdoms to connect with their Outmer cousins, the occurrences in the province were far more noteworthy back then. With that said, let's look into the First Era. This era began the day King Eplir, a bosmer, founded the Cameron dynasty and began his rule over the province. This is also the first we hear of the bosmer embracing the terms of the Green Pact. Under the rule of King Eplir, the Wood Elves adapted to please the forest god known as Aethra. Under this new pact, the bosmer established a united way of life. They swore never to kill, injure or eat any of the vegetation in Valenwood, and as you can imagine, this meant that under the Cameron dynasty, the bosmer became quite protective of their sacred homeland. This unification was no easy feat either, as before now the Wood Elves were incredibly divided, and there was very little by way of maintaining order in a land where merely finding your way around was a struggle. One of King Eplir's first acts was to form a trade pact with the slave rebels of the Eletian Order in the 340th year of the First Era. As the bosmer could not chop down their own trees for materials, trading was an absolute necessity. But this pact was undone 29 years later when one of the bosmer wild hunts killed the king of Skyrim, Borgas, who had been planning war on the bosmer. The wild hunt, for those who don't know, is a ritual known to bosmer shamans, which turns participants into reckless, bloodthirsty killers who consume their enemies before consuming themselves. This ritual is only done in the interest of protecting Valenwood from invaders and threats. Valenwood maintained its independence for over 2,000 years until the year 2714 of the First Era, when warfare with Cyrodiil and Colovia, as well as the impact of the Thracian Plague, brought the Cameron dynasty under the wing of the Riemann Empire. Riemann was kind to the bosmer though, and turned the major cities of Valenwood into bona fide powers. This made Valenwood simultaneously stronger and easier to govern. After the Second Empire fell in the 430th year of the Second Era, the Camerons tried to reclaim their unified state as it had been before being absorbed by the Imperials. Unfortunately, they had grown too far apart culturally and warred amongst themselves, as well as with the Khajiit of elsewhere and the Colovians of Cyrodiil. Without their combined strength, the powers of the Wood Elves was waning, and there was a threat that constant frivolous conflicts would eventually whittle them away. During the 5th century, however, the Cameron dynasty re-established itself and made Eldenroot its new capital, and the future capital of the Aldmeri Dominion 3 centuries later. During the interregnum, between the fall of the Second Empire and the rise of the Third Empire under Tiber Septim, almost all remnants of human settlements in Valenwood were gone and the land was reclaimed by the beast folk. Much of the imperial sway on the bosmer was a result of their need for external resources, but the Wood Elves were soon able to turn to the Aldmeri Dominion for those needs, and they bid good riddance to the caravans of the Colovians. The highlight of the Second Era for Valenwood was joining the Second Aldmeri Dominion in the 830th year of the Second Era, alongside the Khajiit of the Elsewhere Confederacy. Eventually though, the Second Aldmeri Dominion was wiped out by Tiber Septim, removing a large portion of Valenwood's power, just like they had at the conclusion of the previous era. In the early years of the Third Era, Tiber Septim decided to avoid dissension from the sore and wounded bosmer by allowing Valenwood to retain small portions of its independence. As a result, the Cameron kings were allowed to stay in some capacity, and when given an inch, a wood elf named Haemon Cameron, the Cameron usurper, took a mile. In the 2 years spanning from 3rd Era 249 to 251, he had conquered all of Valenwood and marched northward with great success until he was defeated by the Bretons at the Battle of Firewaves in the 267th year of the 3rd Era. That very much set up the tone for the era for the bosmer of Valenwood, as they were caught up in a number of devastating wars. There was the 5-year war against the Khajiit, which the bosmer suffered an overwhelming defeat in. And then there was the War of the Blue Divide against the Altmer of the Somerset Isles, resulting in another defeat. At the climax of the era, the fatigued bosmer saw the return of the Wild Hunt, as well as the first instance of the walking city of Falanesti taking root in history, and even the rise of a bosmer prophet known as the Precursor, heralding the return of Ephra, the forest god. And that brings us to the 4th Era. In an attempt to re-establish the might of the Aldmeri Dominion, the Falmor extended their reach into Valenwood and elsewhere. Shortly after the Somerset Isles becoming independent again, they, along with their followers in Valenwood, plotted a coup to remove imperial rule in Tamriel. However, Valenwood was torn, and this didn't happen without numerous rebellions. These rebellions were funded by the imperial Penitus Oculatus, but most of them were quashed harshly. When Alinor and Valenwood consolidated officially into the 3rd Aldmeri Dominion, they became significantly more powerful. This ultimately led up to the Great War, which, as we know, eventually resulted in the White Gold Concordat that massively fell in favour of the Falmer. Recent reports from Valenwood suggest that once again they are in a state of strife, as the Aldmeri Dominion is supposedly in the process of cleansing the province. Could this be a sign of an uprising in the years to come? Subscribe to FudgeMuppet and give the video a like if you enjoyed it. This has been the history of Valenwood, the home to my personal favourite race, the bosmer. Also, if you'd like to keep up with the goings on at FudgeMuppet or want to interact with us directly, follow us on Twitter. The links can be found just below in the description. Thanks for watching guys, I'm Drew and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.